Good evening and welcome to Advanced Facilitating Skills, a Lions University course brought to you by the USA-Canada Lions Leadership Forum. My name is Lion Budwall and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's webinar and remind you that we are recording this session for those who cannot participate live tonight or for anyone wishing to review the material at a later time. And once we begin, you may be asked to respond to a question, and you can do so by either raising your hand in your control panel there, and we will call on you. We'll unmute you, and you can verbally share your question with everyone. Or you can type your question in the questions pane in the panel along the right side of your screen, and Lion John Johnson will answer some of those questions that might come forward. Advanced Facilitating Skills is course 205, a required course for the Lions University Master's Program that's designed to help Lions lead at the district level. The Master's Program involves the completion of the 10 required courses you see on the left side of your screen, and at least 5 of the elective courses that are shown on the right side of your screen. This is the Lions University website, lionsuniversity.org. And this slide shows a page in the bachelor's program listing the courses offered in that particular level. The master's program page would have a similar information, but would include the courses, of course, for the master's program. If you were to click on any of the courses listed on the page, you'd then be taken directly to that particular course page, giving you all the details for that course, along with a link to register for the course and links to any course handouts, and of course the course quiz. We even have a calendar page you can click on to see what courses are scheduled in the weeks and months ahead. This slide shows what a course page typically looks like. It lists the course name and number, gives a description of the course, shows who the faculty member is, and gives a description of the course, gives you the links to register for the class and any course materials. And if you haven't done so already, you would need to create a separate username and password to get in to register for the course and have access to the quiz. After participating in the webinar or watching the video of the webinar, click on the Mark as Completed tab at the bottom of the page, and you will then be allowed to take the quiz. When you do complete the quiz and submit your answers, you'll be given the results instantly. We've added this benefit to the course pages about 2 or 3 months ago, and it's a nice addition. You can see how you're doing along with all the courses for your particular progress at any time. All you have to do is you click on the My Account tab near the top of the page and see a first-hand view of the courses you've completed in both the bachelor's and the master's program. Our faculty member this evening is Lion John Johnson. Lion John is a past council chairperson and comes to us from the great state of Michigan, multiple District 11, where he is an attorney. He's been a presenter at numerous venues, including the USA-Canada Lions Leadership Forum, and we are pleased to have him as a faculty member to the master's program of Lions University. So at this time, it is my pleasure to welcome Lion John.
Thank you, Lion Bud. Can we go to the objectives?
There we are.
All right. This slide shows you what the PowerPoint, our discussion, and the online resources that I've collected for you will cover. We'll define facilitation. We'll talk a little bit about some purposes and uses. We'll talk about several different types of things you can do with facilitation. We'll primarily talk about facilitation of meetings, and then we'll talk about kind of a template you can use and some techniques and There are about 10 slides worth of online resources that are there and are also in the on the course page. So facilitation and mediation are often used interchangeably, and because I've been facilitating and mediating for 25 or more years, sometimes I slip into that. We're talking about the same things in the context of what we're talking about today. There are a lot of specific definitions in the online resources depending on what kind of facilitating you're doing, what your objectives are, what the group wants to do, and what your goals are. But in general, facilitation is a guide to help people move through a process together and reach some outcome. All facilitation involves managing change in some way. It involves openness to new ideas. That's one of the keys that makes it work. Effective listening. As a facilitator, one of the most important things we can do is listen and actually hear and understand what's being said. And then it's very effective to repeat back to someone in their own words. It shows that you're invested, you're involved, you're listening, and you're validating to some extent what that person is saying. And then as you conclude on a particular point or your entire meeting, facilitation involves summarizing. Now, there are a number of purposes and uses. Most of them we're not going to really talk about tonight. We'll just hit them. Enabling learning is a whole area. Resolving disputes is often what people are most familiar with facilitation, at least from my sphere as a lawyer. And conducting meetings is another significant area, and that's where we're going to spend most of our time tonight. Facilitating learning is just guiding people by giving them tools, primarily so they can become self-directed. It requires knowledge of different learning styles. Does one of the people learn best by reading things, by seeing things on a screen like this PowerPoint, by hearing things, by some combination of those? You really have to have an understanding of that to be a good facilitator of learning, but it's well beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about tonight. There are some materials in the online resources, particularly the Lions Clubs International LGT materials, that do talk about facilitating of learning. Now, facilitating disputes isn't our focus, but it is a common use of facilitation, and it's basically a structured form of negotiation using a neutral third party, the facilitator. Lions Clubs International does have a dispute resolution process. It's called conciliation, and I have a link to that in the online resources if you want to look at that further. And it in and of itself could be an entire one of these seminars, but facilitating disputes is really beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about tonight, although there are a number of materials in the online resources that will give you more information or get you started in looking at additional information if you're interested in learning more in that area. So let's move to facilitating meetings, because that's the core of this course. And when I refer to basic responsibilities, that's responsibilities of you and me as a facilitator. And those basic responsibilities are also things that are going to help you be successful. Number one, you have to start on time, and you have to plan ahead of time. If you're a district governor chairing a cabinet meeting, a zone chair chairing a zone meeting, or a committee chair chairing a committee meeting, you need to be ready for that meeting before you arrive. You need to have an agenda, and it seems to work best if you can have that agenda distributed ahead of time, whether it's by email or some other way, so that people know what to expect. And if you can't do that, at least hand it out at the beginning and have people take a look at it. Stating objectives in many ways kind of depends on what type of meeting you're facilitating. If you're running a cabinet meeting, it may be simply recognizing the agenda, but if you're facilitating a planning session, it's probably more involved, and it becomes an overview of why the group is there and what their expectations are, which is the next point. The group expectation at a cabinet meeting might just be, we get through the agenda on a timely basis and we're out of here before lunch. But for a planning session, it's probably more about what the participants expect to leave the session with, or what they expect to accomplish during the session. Guiding a group is, it's somewhat intuitive. We all have our own styles and our own ways, and we know what works for us. But what you want to do there is help people get information out and share it with the rest of the group. In a planning session, it might be small breakout discussions where then those 3 or 4 people have a spokesperson who then reports back to the group on their subtopic. Or maybe it's simply going around the table and asking everybody for a comment on a particular agenda item. Closure that's just another word for summing up. You sum up the issue, the discussion, the result, and then if there are action items, which you hope there are on any of these things, somebody's going to be responsible for accomplishing a task. So we identify the responsible person, what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to get it done, and how do we measure success. So some of the keys to success: focus on what the participants are saying. Listen, listen, listen. I don't think that can be overemphasized. Listening and then repeating back what people have said is an effective technique to keep conversations going, because that's what you're doing as a facilitator. You want the conversation to occur between the other participants so they can come up with ideas and solutions that they're all invested in because they thought them up and they've worked them out. It's also important to understand why you are there and what the meeting needs to achieve. Now, comfort is a number of things. It can be the room temperature, it can be lighting, it can be the layout of the room. Are you seated in classroom style? Are people around a table? Are you at square tables? Is there water in the room? Are breaks scheduled? But I think most importantly, it's valuing and welcoming openly discussion by everybody who's involved, because that helps you get to group ownership. You'll need to develop your own way of a structure for allowing everybody to be heard. It may be calling on people. It may just be letting the discussion flow, but then interrupting and asking somebody who's been quiet what their thoughts are. But you want to stick with your agenda, and you want to keep moving forward, and you want to make sure that you have enough time to get from where you are to the end. It's important that the group own whatever decisions are made, because you as a facilitator are not the decider. You're not driving the bus. You're using the map to keep the bus on the right road. The literature indicates and studies show that when a group reaches a decision or a conclusion on its own by discussion or consensus or even a majority vote, it's much more likely to follow through than if somebody imposes that decision on them. You're going to have a number of different roles as a facilitator. You're always going to be a group leader, and that's where you're listening, repeating, summarizing. You manage the agenda. At the very least, that means starting and ending on time. Sometimes you're going to be a content expert because you know all about the Lions chicken dinners, and so you're the go-to expert there in addition to helping the discussion move along. And in that type of a role, you're going to ask and answer questions. You're always going to be a role model. You need to be positive, professional, courteous, and listen. Sometimes you're a consultant. They'll ask you questions. You need to help people understand and apply some of the ideas that they're working with. In the online materials, there is a reference, there's a couple of pages to a short article called The 7 Separators of Great Facilitation, which is actually a book by this Michael Wilkinson, who has a business called Leadership Strategies, Inc. And the slide that's up now and the next one, I paraphrased his 7 separators, and I just want to make some comments about those. The first one, establish and maintain a high energy level. If you're not energized and enthusiastic to be there, why would anybody else be excited to be there? Now, asking questions that draw vivid images. I thought about this a bit, and I have an example that's current in the news because this can involve challenging assumptions or commonly held beliefs, and it's going to depend on circumstances. But an example that's pretty vivid, and I decided to frame this somewhat extremely to make a point. But earlier this summer, after the massacre at the church in Charleston, South Carolina, if Confederate battle flag wavers waved them only in the faces of black public officials and not in the face of white public officials, which is what actually happened in Oklahoma City in July, do those actions show racism just as if they were wearing white sheets? Why do those angry people scream and brandish the battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia at the President of the United States and not at the governors of South Carolina and Oklahoma? Those are very stark and probably very divisive way of phrasing things, and I did that on purpose because it makes it difficult for participants, if they're going to be talking about those things, to ignore the underlying issues that those questions raise. And it just it brings to the fore for people things they may not want to confront. You need to be quick on your feet. Analyze what people say and use it. Reflect it back to them. Use their words in your follow-up questions to them to keep discussion going. Now, if you write down as you're taking notes people's own words, reflect them back to them. It's very effective at keeping people engaged, and it'll help get them as an owner of whatever the ultimate outcome of your meeting is. You need to have some kind of stock ways of moving from one subject to another, and it's not rocket science. It could be something simple like we've decided that Bill's going to chair the chicken dinner. Now we need to talk about who's going to be responsible for the highway cleanup project next month. So you're just showing that you're transitioning from one subject on your agenda to another. Now, separate neutrality from passivity. That's somewhat related to the second point, but it's also important if you have some subject matter expertise or you've been through a discussion before, you may interject and challenge some assumptions. As an example, when I was a council chair, Council of Governors was discussing criteria for becoming a Lion State project in Michigan. We had existing criteria. We had an issue with, we didn't have a way to get rid of a state project if they weren't really meeting the criteria anymore. And I had been part of a strategic planning discussion in another group called the Executive Focus Group that had discussed in great depth some of those very issues. And a couple of the governors started to lead the group down a rabbit hole where the discussion wasn't going to have a good outcome. I don't recall exactly what the details were, but I intervened by interrupting their discussion and making substantive comments about the Strategic Planning Committee's thoughts over several meetings over several months versus this 5 or 10 minute discussion they were having on this topic, and redirecting their discussion to more productive areas. And they ultimately came up with a policy that's now part of our state multiple district constitution. Mr. Wilkinson's last point is basically one size does not fit all. You need to be flexible, and that's just part of going with the flow. The next couple of slides are a rough sequence of the events of facilitation. You want to start on time. You want to welcome everyone. You know, it depends to some extent. If you're in a group where everybody knows everybody, that's one thing. You still want to welcome everybody, but identifying yourself and then either introducing the rest of the people in the room, or more commonly probably going around the room and having people introduce themselves. Some people like to use icebreakers. That may depend on the type of meeting that you're facilitating, but a common one that I've heard is asking each person to tell the group something about themselves that they don't think anybody else in the group would know about them. Early in the meeting, you want to review the agenda. It's oftentimes in a cabinet meeting, it's going to be a motion to approve the agenda, and then you move forward. In a planning session, you may talk about what are the objectives, why are we here, what 4 or 5 big ideas do we want to deal with. And then ground rules. Ground rules will help you deal with problems if they occur, and ground rules are things that need to be laid out in the beginning of a meeting. They may be things done verbally with just discussion and writing them on a board or a flip chart, or actually when I was a council chair, we had a set of ground rules that everybody got before the first council meeting, and they include things like speak only when recognized by the facilitator, which sometimes is honored in the breach. Don't interrupt. Be courteous. No name calling, which that's a common ground rule when you're facilitating disputes, because people can get angry and they can get excited. No side conversations, and we'll talk about that because that's also a common issue in any kind of meeting. Be willing to listen. Be open to new ideas. No checking your phone or email. Easier said than done. Sometimes people will request that all those electronic devices be turned off. If it's a group where there's a history of problems and issues with that, you might even have people put them in a pile in the middle of the table until it's break time. People need to respect the agenda. They need to remain on topic. They need to respect others in their opinions. And then a rule that's difficult for some people to accept, but when a group makes a decision, once they make it, whatever you think about it, you need to accept it and implement it. We're not politicians. We are a service organization, and we need to be rowing in the same direction. And then another one might be, if you need to use a bathroom, we're all adults, just get up and go do it and come back. Encouraging participation, that's just part of the process, and it'll just become part of who you are and what you do. Stick to the agenda. Sometimes it's okay to get off on a tangent for a while, but you need to rein people in and get back there so that you're not wasting their time and people are able to get out of there. If it's supposed to be a 2-hour session, they're out of there in 2 hours. Avoiding detailed decision making is there because this meeting is generally, particularly if it's a planning session, not the place for those details. That's in an action plan later or a committee meeting, and maybe it's in action items that need to be taken care of after the meeting. People who have a task or own a goal with a deadline are much more likely to follow through, which is why you seek commitments. And you do that, and everybody does it. You do it in front of everybody. So everybody knows that Joe owns objective number 1, and he needs to take steps to accomplish that within 30 days and report back to the chairman, something like that. You bring closure to each item and then you move on. That's summarizing, repeating, and moving on, and it'll be, all right, we passed a motion to have a Lions candy sale in September. Joe's going to be the chairman, and now we're going to talk about our holiday gift baskets, something like that. It's just it's another transitional thing, and at that point you may also include what the follow-up is and who's going to be responsible for it. You always want to be courteous. Really, we've all heard it, but everything you need to know about how to treat people properly you learned by the time you were in kindergarten. Just play well with others and you'll be a successful facilitator. And you want to thank the participants and close the meeting with a final overall summary that may include the action items, who's responsible, and what the deadlines are. Some skills and tips. Don't memorize. It's hard to be enthused, engaged, listening, and observant if you are reading or trying to remember what you think you are supposed to say. Now, if you were in the same room with me, you could tell I was reading that, and I tried to do it slow to give you, but that's not fun to listen to, and it's not exciting. So be yourself. We all make mistakes. It happens. We just move on. We're flexible. Maybe we laugh at ourselves. We just go with the flow as long as we can stick with the agenda. Body language is something that we can't do tonight, but if we were in the same room, we would see the body language. I would see the body language of the group I was facilitating. The group would see my body language. We know things like crossed arms and leaning back. Typically that person's hostile to whatever's going on, or at least they're not engaged. And somebody who's smiling and leaning forward is usually receptive to whatever's going on and they're engaged in it. Check back with the group. I find that in facilitations I've been a participant in, the leaders who check back frequently seem to keep a higher level of enthusiasm going, and part of that is because checking back can be summarizing, but sometimes it's taking the pulse of the group. Even though we had a break scheduled for 20 minutes farther out, maybe we need to take one now to re-energize people. At that same point, you can summarize and pause, and you then may get some questions. You may confirm agreements, you may clear up misunderstandings, and then you're able to move on to your next agenda item. Your own behavior affects everybody in the room in some way. So you want to be as natural and friendly as you can, and you want to give people their space. Flapping hands are distracting. I'm a lawyer who spent most of the last 35 years in courtrooms, and my wife thinks I'm Italian, even though I'm not, because I tend to move my hands around, and it's something that, you know, it's hard to get rid of. You don't want to jingle change or keys in your pocket, but if you can put your hands by your side, if you're just standing in the open, that's probably the best posture. If you're using a podium and you tend to have your hands going all over the place, hanging on to the side of the podium is a better alternative for most people. If you're comfortable getting away from that podium and standing out in the open, or even walking around as you speak, that can be more welcoming and more opening, and people are more receptive of it. Watch your speech, because the content of what you say makes a difference. You know, you can't be yelling, swearing, or making demeaning comments even in jest as a facilitator, because you're a neutral, you're the professional leader of the discussion, and if you cross that line and start yelling, swearing, or demeaning, you're no longer the facilitator. You've in some way taken a side. Your own body language is going to affect what happens with the group. You want to be as open and welcoming as you can, and as well as being natural, because you want to be who you are. Unless you're doing it for a purpose, you probably want to avoid folding your arms across your chest. You might want to do it if you're dealing with a disruptive person who's having a conversation or doing something on their phone or their iPad when they should be paying attention to whoever's speaking. You might kind of walk over by them, fold your arms. Maybe they get the message, maybe not. And if they don't, we'll have some other things to talk about in a few minutes. You want to look at people. Try not to be fidgety. And sometimes you're going to find in every group there's people that want to monopolize the conversation and others that don't say very much. But sometimes those people that don't say very much, when they do speak, we should be listening, because they actually have oftentimes important things to say. And sometimes with those quieter individuals, if you move near them with it and then ask them what their thoughts are in an encouraging way, that may help draw them into the discussion. Now, lots of times in facilitation, you're going to be writing things on a blackboard or a whiteboard these days, or on a flip chart. While you're doing that, don't talk to the blackboard or the wall. Write whatever you got to write. Turn around and talk with people. Let's talk about disruptors. Disruptors are people who will try and dominate the conversation. They'll keep going off the agenda because they've got something they want to talk about, whatever it is, but it's not what the group's there to talk about. These are people that have side conversations. They think they're right. Maybe they're demeaning or ridiculing other ideas or other people. There are a number of techniques you can use to prevent disruptors from being disruptive, and then there are some techniques to intervene when they are being disruptive to end the disruption, and that's what we're going to talk about next. First is going to be some preventions. If you get an agreement on the agenda and the ground rules and the outcomes in the beginning of your meeting, then you can use those things to get people back on the agenda and following the rules and focusing on the outcomes. We gave a number of examples of ground rules before. I'm not going to repeat them, although I'd be happy to send folks a list if they wanted it at some point. once you get agreement on the agenda, you can suggest to somebody that, all right, that's a nice topic, but we need to get back on the agenda. And if you listen carefully and then ask follow-up questions or comment using the words of the participant, it continues to focus the discussion on whatever your agenda topic is, and it makes it more difficult for people to start talking about things that aren't on topic. When I say show respect for experience, listen to your elder statesmen. They became elder statesmen for a reason in your group, and listen to them even if your group and you as a facilitator know the group's going to be moving on from the ideas that we've all sat through in some of our club meetings, like, we can't do that. We've never done it that way. We always do this. Because if you listen to them and validate their point of view, even if the group later rejects it, it should help them buy into that group decision. If you haven't found it out, you need to find out group expectations, and that's one of the reasons to do it in the beginning. Is if the expectations of you and the group are divergent, you need to get on the same page. And if they expect something very different than what you had planned for, you as the facilitator are the one that generally that's going to need to adjust and be flexible to align your focus to where your group wants to go. If you stay in the facilitator role, you're Switzerland, you're neutral, you're the referee, you're moving the discussion along, you're in the discussion, but you're not of the discussion, you're not part of it. Once you take a side, you're not facilitating. There may be some limited circumstances where that's appropriate, but we're not in general going to be in that situation. Try not to be defensive. Try to stay neutral and be on topic. If somebody's insulting you, that's hard to do, but you want to avoid personality disputes and discussions about personalities, and just try to redirect and refocus a group onto the topic. If you can get the people that are important in the group to buy in, the power players, the club president, the longtime member, the past district officer in your club, if they buy into where you want to go and the other folks in the meeting perceive that the influential people in the group are on board with the agenda, the goals, and the outcomes, it's going to be easier to keep everybody on task and prevent some disruptions. Now, interventions. Use the agenda. Go back to it. We're talking about item number 5. What you've said is interesting, but we're discussing X. Maybe we can discuss Z later if we have time and the group agrees. You can remind the group, even though you're really talking to the disruptor or two disruptors, of whatever the ground rule is they agreed to follow, and move them back to the topic. Another thing that I see, and I see it especially with club presidents, a lot of them are reluctant to use the gavel. You need to use it appropriately. It can be your friend. It gets attention and it'll refocus people. But you got to hit the gavel, and then you got to quickly follow it up with a statement like, we need to return to agenda item X, or Joe's speaking, please let him finish, and then get back to whatever you're supposed to be doing. Be honest, everybody in the room knows what the disruptor is, and they recognize it. The only person who might not is the disruptor, so you just confront them. I want to hit a couple of examples and then wind up, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions. I want to talk about side conversations. You can actually use several interventions together, maybe separately, to deal with people having side conversations. One is just to ask the people having the side conversation to share their important discussion with the group. That usually ends their discussion. You might also walk over behind or beside them, which is using body language. Maybe you fold your arms, maybe you don't. And just going over there might stop that conversation. If it doesn't, then you might again ask them if they would just share their important discussion with the group. If you need to, you can remind the group, including the disruptors, of the ground rule against side conversations. You might suggest they go outside until their conversation is over. If they still don't get it, and you sense that maybe the rest of the group is ready, you can announce that you're going to take a break early, or you can ask the group if it's ready to take an early break so that after the break you can refocus on the agenda because the side conversation should be done. And then another option, which I would suggest maybe is the last thing, is just directly tell the people having that conversation to either to stop talking and listen to whoever's got the floor. Another kind of disruptor is a dominator. I was the chair of the Midwest I-Bank's Board of Directors several years ago, and we had a director who was a very, very smart man, highly educated. I believe he had a PhD. He was a medical doctor. He was from another culture where women were considered and treated as second or third class citizens. He was very passionate about the I-Bank, but he also had a need for everybody to hear his opinion on lots of things. And he and I clashed at first, but after a couple years we became pretty good friends. Now I had an advantage there. Was we met in a boardroom, and we met in a hollow rectangle, which means that people were sitting around tables and the center was empty. And we had staff that would set up the boardroom with name tents. So I put him on my nearest to my right, which is a preventive thing, and I would start discussion on my left and go around and ask each person their thoughts on an agenda item, so that by the time we got to the disruptor, most of his ideas had been stated, and he had a lot less to say than he had when my predecessor, who he clashed with all the time, had difficulty controlling him. I'd only use that technique about going around the room and recognizing each person individually on major topics when I felt it was important that everybody have an opportunity to speak. If we were talking about something that wasn't a big decision or wasn't particularly controversial, I didn't use that technique, but he always knew it was there if I wanted it. If you don't have the ability to control the seating arrangements, or you can't identify the disruptor ahead of time, you can always interrupt the person if you need to and call on somebody else, and then start calling on people for their opinions and leave your disruptor for last. If somebody's demeaning or ridiculing, you're probably going to have to directly confront their behavior, and you may have to increase your degree of intervention, although you still have to maintain your cool and your neutrality, and some of that comes with age and gray hair. Some of it's learned. There are a bunch of slides that follow this dealing with online resources. Those are also on the course page, and you can link to those. They're things I found just in a Google search that provide a lot of basic and some detailed information, but I'm just going to skip through those. There's about 10 slides, and we need to go to slide 36. Which is the review of objectives, and we don't really need to see this for me to do that. At the beginning, we said we would define facilitation and the purposes and discuss different types of facilitation, some techniques, and some online resources. And basically, we've done that in a very cursory and quick fashion. And if this were a real facilitation. There'd probably be more of a summary. But you all do have a task when you leave this seminar tonight. You have to take and pass the quiz for this class. So with that, if there are questions, I'd be happy to try and address them. And if we don't have any questions, thank you for your time and your service. And I'll turn it back to Lion Bud.
All right, thanks, Lion John. I'll look through the listing of participants, see if there's any hands up. Are you checking the question pane to see if there's anything that was brought up during your presentation?
Yeah, I do see one question here. Actually, I see more than one. This window didn't open up very big, so let me read these. Will the slides be available to the attendees later on? I think the answer to that is yes. Is that correct, Lion Bud?
Yeah, they can contact me. I can send them the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint's going to be going to Wendy Kane, and also they can all of the online resources are linked on to your course page, so they can download all those any of those online resources you mentioned.
Okay, I have a question from AJ, which I think is a good question, and so I'm going to read it. I'm going to pull my phone over here because my computer doesn't have a screen. It says, as facilitator, well, that should you assign a scribe to do the writing? If you have enough people, sure. If not, no. But the question I wanted to get from AJ was, how do you reflect back without them thinking you are mocking them? It's just picking up on key phrases and using them in a question that might further the discussion. It might be, let me see if I can think of an example here quickly. I guess we'll go back to the chicken dinner thing. Barbecued chicken. All right, Bill, you said that you thought we should switch from charcoal to gas. Why is that? Because Bill had said we should switch to gas grills for whatever. It's something like that. It's and part of it's, I think, your tone, but it's just using it in a way that helps people understand, yes, you are listening. Most people receive it as it's validating that they're being heard rather than mocking, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there, John. When you were given that example, if you wanted to change to gas instead of charcoal or whatever, he may have, people will do this. They'll make a statement thinking about all the ramifications and all the reasons in their head, but yet when they try to bring the topic up, they'll just make the statement of what they want to change without giving the background of how they got to that point before they made the comment. So with you not having all the knowledge, all the background, when you hear the comment, it's very appropriate then to ask them to explain a little bit further why they made the comment or why they think that choice would be better, so you can give everyone a better overview and a better idea of where they're coming from. So sometimes you just need to ask them to explain it a little bit further. And I don't think that's mocking. I think that's just trying to gather more information. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
All right. You have anybody else there that had something written in?
I do. I'm not sure how much. It may be a comment more than a question, and I'll read it. To get back to scroll back to the beginning of it.
Lion AJ always comes up with some good questions.
This one says support down, challenge up, meaning once the group has decided on something, get your full support. If something needs challenged, bring it to the senior staff, not the support crew. That's probably a way of saying, at least as I interpret it, challenge your leaders. You know, get them engaged, get them involved in discussing major changes, and that's a good idea. But ideas can come both from the top and the bottom. But yes, getting the top people or those who are the decision makers challenged to do more is a good thing. And then yes, supporting those at the other end is also important. And I think that somewhat corresponds with trying to draw out and get the opinions or insights of everybody involved, whether they're vocal in a past or current leader or somebody who's new to the organization and might have an idea that none of us have ever thought about just because we're Lions and we always did it this way and we can't do it any other way. That's what I had here in the question box.
Yeah, you have you talked about respect experience, and you made you connected it with the phrase the elder statesman. Listen to them and try to get them to buy into the entire group process. And sometimes that could be good, and sometimes you could have some issues, like you stated earlier. They may be the ones that are stuck on doing it the old way, and no way but the old way. But then there are some clubs that have elder statesmen that like the change for the good. And man, if you can get some of those folks that are open-minded on your side or on the side of the group to buy into it, I think everyone else who may have had some questions on which way to go would follow those elder statesmen, because they do have the experience and the respect of being there for a long time. So that could work.
Yes, and many of us fear change because it's different and it's uncertain. But one thing that I've learned is the only certainty is that things will change.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I would like to thank Lion John for the excellent presentation tonight on advanced facilitating skills, and a lot of great information here, and a lot of wonderful online resources to gather and download off the website, right off the course page. So we thank you again, John, for everything you've done, and thank you for your time tonight.
Can I say two things before you conclude?
You certainly can, and I want to also tell you that if you hang on, and after the webinar is done and everyone is dismissed, we'll just go over a couple of things and we'll be
okay.
All right. Okay, go ahead.
I want to see all of you at the graduation in Grand Rapids. I will be there. I'm the host committee chair. And number two, I'd be happy to address any questions people have offline. I'll give you an email address. It's jjohnson at MI for Michigan, lawyers.net.
Great. That's jjohnson at milawyers.net.
Yes.
Terrific.
And I'd be happy to, if you want to email me questions, I try to get back to you within a day or so.
Great. Appreciate it. And the slide I have up here right now is about the graduation ceremonies that will be taking place at the USA Canada Lions Forum in Grand Rapids. And like Lion John said, he is the host chairman, so he's looking forward to having a big crowd there, and hopes to see as many of the participants and students of the Lions University there. And as a faculty member, he will be attending the graduation ceremonies too as well. They will be held on Friday night in Grand Rapids from 5 to 6. And if you are able to graduate from either the bachelor's program and the master's program, you can do you are able to graduate from bachelor's, and a few will be able to graduate as well from the master's. And you'll receive a pin, which are shown on the bottom of that slide there. The one pin for the bachelor, another pin for the master's, and a diploma. And you get a picture taken with President Yamada. So we hope to see you there, and look forward to a great time in Grand Rapids. Also want to remind you of our next two webinars. Again, they're required courses for the master's program. Tuesday, a week from tonight, will be strategic planning. That was a change from originally planned. These two courses had to be switched because of personal conflicts with some of the faculty members. So strategic planning will be next Tuesday, and then 2 weeks from then will be recognition. And again, those are both required courses. So if you're planning on graduating from the master's program in Grand Rapids, you will need to attend those two courses as well. So with that, remind you that once you get off tonight, I believe I loaded up the quiz. I haven't had a chance to take a look at it to see if it was loaded up correctly, but if it isn't correctly loaded, you'll see that when you get on there, and I'll get on there tonight and make sure it is. So if it isn't correct tonight, look for it first thing in the morning. But you can take the quiz by going on the course page 205 in the master's program. So with that, thank you again, Lion John, for attending and being the faculty member tonight, and thank you for all the attendees for joining the webinar. I'd like to remind you to log out of this session by clicking on the small X box at the top right-hand corner of the screen. You can go in your file at the top of the menu and click on there to log out. So with that, thank you very much, and hope to see you again in the coming weeks. Thank you.